On January 8, 1815, the Battle of New Orleans was fought between the British Army under Major General Sir Edward Pakenham and the United States Army under Brevet Major General Andrew Jackson, roughly 5 miles southeast of the French quarter of New Orleans, in the current suburb of Chalmette, Louisiana. The engagement marked the climax of Britain's 5-month Gulf campaign, fought from September 1814 to February 1815, which aimed to capture New Orleans, West Florida, and potentially the Louisiana Territory. The campaign began with the First Battle of Fort Bowyer and formally shifted toward New Orleans on December 14, 1814, with the Battle of Lake Borgne. In the weeks that followed, numerous skirmishes and artillery exchanges occurred in the lead-up to the decisive confrontation. The battle was fought just 15 days after the Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24, 1814, officially ending the War of 1812. However, the treaty had not yet been ratified by the United States, and thus was not in effect, because news of the agreement had not reached North America. Despite holding advantages in manpower, training, and battlefield experience, British forces were repelled in a poorly coordinated assault that was declined in little more than 30 minutes. American losses totaled 71 casualties, while British casualties exceeded 2,000, including the deaths of General Sir Edward Pakenham and his second-in-command Major General Samuel Gibbs. On January 8, 1918, the 14 points were a statement of principles for peace that was to be used for peace negotiations in order to end World War I. The principles were outlined in a January 8, 1918 speech on war aims and peace terms to the United States Congress by President Woodrow Wilson. However, his main Allied colleagues, Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of the United Kingdom, and Vittorio Emanuele Orlando of Italy, were skeptical of the applicability of Wilsonian idealism. The United States entered the war against the Central Powers as part of the Triple Entente on April 6, 1917. This decision was driven in part by Germany's renewed campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare against ships trading with Britain and France, as well as by the interception of the Zimmermann telegram. Despite this, President Woodrow Wilson sought to keep the United States detached from Europe's long-standing rivalries among the great powers. If the nation were to fight, he wanted its involvement guided by principles rather than nationalist rivalries or territorial ambitions. The emphasis on morale objectives grew stronger after the Bolsheviks, following the collapse of the Russian government, revealed secret agreements made among the Allied powers. Wilson's address also served as a response to Vladimir Lenin's decree on peace, issued in November 1917 after the October Revolution. In his speech, Wilson adapted many domestic progressive ideals, such as free trade, transparent diplomacy, democratic governance, and national self-determination, into a framework for foreign policy. 3 days earlier, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George had delivered a speech outlining Britain's war aims that shared some similarities with Wilson's vision, though it called for reparations from the Central Powers and offered less specific commitments to the non-Turkish peoples of the Ottoman Empire. Wilson's 14 points were largely drawn from the work of the Inquiry, a research group of roughly 150 experts led by this foreign policy advisor, Edward M. House, which studied the issues expected to arise at the forthcoming peace conference. And on January 8, 2020, in a military operation codenamed Operation Martyr Soleimani, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched over 12 ballistic missiles at the El Asad Air Base and Al-Anbar Governorate, western Iraq, as well as another airbase in Erbil in response to the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani by a United States drone strike. The strike was the largest ballistic missile assault ever carried out against U.S. forces overseas. At first, the United States downplayed the severity of the attack, initially reporting that no personnel had been killed or injured. However, the Department of Defense later acknowledged that 110 service members had been diagnosed and treated for traumatic brain injuries, primarily concussions, as a result of the strike. Several of those affected were subsequently awarded the Purple Heart. Reports indicated that Iran had warned the Iraqi government of the impending attack shortly beforehand. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stated that the strike was intended to be lethal, though some analysts argue that it was carefully calibrated to avoid fatalities to reduce the likelihood of a direct U.S. military response. American officials said fatalities were averted because early warning was provided by the United States Space Force. In the aftermath, the United States reinforced its defenses by deploying Patriot and other missile defensive systems to several bases in Iraq. On the same day, Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, a Boeing 737 AKV from Imam Khomeini International Airport, Tehran, Iran, to Boryspil International Airport, Kiev, Ukraine, was shot down by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps shortly after takeoff and crashed in Shahryar County, killing all 176 passengers and crew members on board. The aircraft was struck by missiles fired by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The incident took place 5 days after the U.S. killing of Qasem Soleimani and only hours after Iran launched Operation Martyr Soleimani, during which the IRGC fired multiple ballistic missiles at U.S. forces. Both the killing and the retaliatory strikes occurred in Iraq. Iranian officials initially denied responsibility for the plane's destruction. However, subsequent investigations by Western intelligence agencies, along with pressure from the Iranian public, determined that the aircraft had been hit by 2 surface-to-air missiles. On January 11, 2020, the Iranian government acknowledged that the IRGC had shot down Flight 752 after mistakenly identifying it as a United States cruise missile. The head of the IRGC issued an apology for the error. This admission sparked renewed anti-government demonstrations across Iran, part of the broader 2019-2020 protest movement, with demonstrators demanding the removal of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. There were 167 passengers and 9 crew members. Iranian officials stated that among the passengers departing Iran, 146 traveled on Iranian passports, while 10 used Afghan passports, 5 Canadian, 4 Swedish, and 2 Ukrainian. According to Ukraine's Foreign Minister Vadim Pristaiko and a passenger manifest by Ukraine International Airlines, the 167 passengers included 82 Iranian citizens, 63 Canadians, 10 Swedes, 4 Afghans, 3 Britons, and 3 Germans. In addition, there were 11 Ukrainians on board, 9 of whom were crew members. Germany's foreign ministry later clarified that no German nationals were among the passengers, explaining that the 3 individuals listed were Afghan citizens residing in Germany as asylum seekers. Under Iranian law, dual nationals are regarded solely as Iranian citizens by the Iranian government. Of the 167 passengers, 138 were en route to Canada via Ukraine. Many of the Canadian victims of Iranian origin were students or academics affiliated with Canadian universities who had been visiting Iran during the winter holidays. The disaster marked the deadliest aviation incident involving Canadian citizens since the 1985 bombing of Air India Flight 182. On January 15, 2020, Canada's Minister of Transport Marc Garneau confirmed that 57 Canadians had lost their lives in the crash. The crew consisted of 50-year-old Captain Vladimir Gapanenko, 11,600 hours on the Boeing 737 aircraft, including 5,500 hours as captain. 48-year-old First Officer Serhiy Kumenko, 7,600 hours on the Boeing 737, and 42-year-old instructor pilot Alexei Namkin, 12,000 hours on Boeing 737s, including 6,600 as captain. Those who are from Ukraine and Iran, never forget 752. And also, those who are still protesting against the Islamic government, long live Pahlavi and long live the Persian people. And for Ukraine, Slava Ukraini. That's all the events I have for this morning. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave a comment down below and subscribe. This is Stephen Luke, and I'll see you next time for another history update.